continuing into Bootstrap today. So discussing more about components and utility classes and things like that. So we're going to basically review a lot of some of what we've talked about already, and then just practice using these things and try to become more comfortable with them. The sprint challenge for this week covers some of what we talked about earlier, doing CSS resets and then using Flexbox to do some manipulation. But then we also will be using Bootstrap for the challenge, and that's probably the heavier part of the challenge is Bootstrap. So just to give you a heads up that we are going to incorporate everything from this unit, but more heavily on Bootstrap. Okay, with that in mind, does anybody have any questions right off the bat? I don't see anything in Slido yet. Okay, let me share my screen and we will jump into Bootstrap again. So yesterday we learned a lot about Bootstrap. We started getting comfortable with the grid in general. And because we now feel a little bit more comfortable working with that grid, getting our layouts to work as we expect them to, we can start adding content to those pages that we have designed. And we can use components within Bootstrap in order to do that. Now, components are these prefabricated elements or pieces of the interface, and we can use them to quickly build out our designs. In a lot of ways, these components are like Legos, that we just grab them, we stack them into our layout, and it's almost as easy as just grabbing those Legos and just putting them where we want them to go. They're composed of CSS and HTML, so their code is familiar to us, how they work. We just have to copy and paste them into our own documents or our code pen or whatever we're working in order to see them in action. So let's go ahead and open up a code pen, and I will use this one for me, and I'll name this demo and then just share the same one so you can watch. Okay, I post this to the channel. That way you can see in that same code pen as I'm typing, in theory, if everything works as expected. So just by way of review, when we want to work with Bootstrap, we need to get the code into our system. So going to the CSS section of our settings, then I'm going to go ahead and go back to the home here on Bootstrap and get started. Under the CSS section, I'm just going to grab this href attribute, copy that, paste it in here, save and close, and now we are able to start borrowing from Bootstrap. So we grabbed some components yesterday, but we're just going to do that again, walk through how they work again. So we'll click on components section of the website. We can see that there are really quite a big number of them. Let's start with a button. So we have some example buttons. We're just going to go ahead and grab this first one. I'm going to Command-C copy and Command-V paste that into my site. And then I can see that the button appears, and it's the primary button. And it takes on all of those attributes of that style. So when you look here, there are several colors associated with these labels: the BTN primary, BTN secondary, BTN success. Those are all in reference to the color and styling of those elements, so that we know when we're working within Bootstrap, if we grab a success button, then it will appear green. So I can copy and paste easily enough, but from Bootstrap, but I can also copy and paste and make changes just to the class declarations in order to get these new buttons. So here I'm going to say danger, and it's grabbing the styling associated with the danger button. So bump that up a little bit so maybe you can see better. But the code should be fairly familiar to us. It's a button, that's the tag, it's a semantic tag so that the browser can read and understand what it is it's trying to present. Type is an attribute of the button. And if we wanted to know what the types are available, then we could do a search button HTML type. So we can see there's a button type attribute of W3 Schools, our old friend. We can go there and see what the options are for a button. And the button attribute just says this is something that's going to be clicked to have some interaction. The submit value for a type is a button that's associated with a form. So when we use the form element in HTML, then the submit button tells the browser to send the content within that form and send it through whatever process is built into that website. And then reset type will tell the browser that when you click this button, it should reset the form and empty out all the elements. So that's just a quick aside there on the HTML to make sure that we're understanding what that type element is. And then we have the class. We know all about classes with our study of CSS. There's a button class, and then there's some styling associated with button primary or button danger that brings us and lets us know that's a different color. And because we understand HTML, we know that we can put whatever we want within that button, within those tags. So I could make this change to be alert. That changes the text of the alert button, or that button to say alert. So it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes grabbing content from Bootstrap can feel a little bit intimidating, but because you've studied some of these other elements, you can just look at the code and begin to understand what's going on and feel a little bit more having a handle around what's going on in Bootstrap. So let's look at a couple of other examples. We pulled in an alert yesterday as well. So I'm going to go ahead and see, I grab this one, copy and paste that in. Again, this is a div, and so we know about that tag. The classes assigned are an alert and then alert warning. So the alert is the shape of this element, probably in the CSS, and then the warning is the color that's assigned to both the text and the background and the border of this element. And then again, we can edit this to be we can make that alert, new alert, whatever we want it to say. We can edit that and update that. Use this styling to call attention to some piece of our interface. All right, let's look at a little bit more complex component. This is a card. This is an example card. So I wanted to pull something up that might be a little bit more similar to the design that we created here. So you've got a card that actually has an image and then an H1, H2, and then some anchor links. This one doesn't have the image, but there are some other similarities. And you can see that this card comes with lots of different implementations of this card. So there's groups, list groups, there's a kitchen sink, they call it, which has basically everything of all the other cards. One with images, and then let's just go ahead and pull this example here. So I'm going to copy this code, paste it into my code pen here. I'm going to collapse that code just so we can look at a few of these elements independently. So this is a div. It's a class of card. Oops, undid that. And it has some styling associated with it of 18 rem. If you'll recall what rem is in reference to, it's the root M width. And so it's pulling from that root level font size. Next, underneath that, we have a card body. And that will give us the content of the card. So we have the shape of the card, the content area. And then underneath that, we have an H5, which is the card title. So in the case of our design, we might say something like Toa Collins is our title. Toa Collins. The subtitle would be Sales Lead. And because in our card, we don't have need for this paragraph, we can actually just delete it. And it's updated by Bootstrap. No worry about the rest of the layout. It's still all good there. And then we have some anchor tags with an href card link. So those links are already styled to give them some affordance to make them appear as though they're links. So in our case, we might call it matoa@employee.com. And then the second link would be a number 647-848-9491. Then we've got a card. And it's relatively simple. These can then be reproduced and placed, and then we can make some nuance changes in order to bring it back into the original design. But that component is there already for us to use without a lot of extra work. Let's look at one more component, and then we'll ask some questions. Component nav bar. Oops, that was slow to respond, so we'll go back to navbar again. So we have some example navbars here. Again, this component has several variations that could be used in common use cases. We have brand with basically everything. It's got a logo, links, and a search field. Here we have just brand on the left-hand side. We have one with the brand link, logo area, and links. And then there's one with the drop-down link as well. And then additional forms within that. So lots of options. We're going to grab this one because it's fairly similar to what we're wanting in terms of what the content is. So go ahead and copy that. Now zoom this out so we can see. I don't know if you noticed that this navbar has some built-in responsiveness to it that would address mobile use cases with implementing a hamburger menu. So just by copying and pasting one group of code, we have some very nice functionality that would enhance our ability to create a responsive design that accommodates for mobile. So you'll notice that when I click on this right here, nothing happens. Does anyone have any idea why that might be?
It's not linked to any other page. Wait, which?
So
It
it's,
doesn't drop down. Okay.
all of these
There's something
links
on the
should
code
theoretically appear in.
that says disabled true. What happens if you change that to false? Would it not be disabled?
Oh, that's a good question. This disabled is in reference to the last link. And when you hover on that last link, you notice that you can't click on it, whereas on the other ones, the hover, you could click on it. So that's what that disabled attribute means. So that class means disabled, and then this attribute tells the browser that it's disabled as well. But the reason I was just giving you a pop quiz of something we haven't really talked about yet, and that is because of JavaScript. There's a lot of pieces of the components in Bootstrap that require JavaScript in order for those interactions to happen. And the fortunate thing about Bootstrap is that you don't actually have to know anything about JavaScript in order to benefit from the interaction capabilities that JavaScript provides. Because JavaScript is basically a coding language that web developers use to create enhanced interactivity, being able to manipulate elements on that browser level view and remove them, add them, and animate them into different locations, different positions. So because I don't have it implemented in this code pen, it's not working. If we go back to their original site and we were to look at the nav bar shrunk down like this, we can see that it provides this animation of a drawer to access those elements. So that hamburger menu becomes a way to expose and show those links. Fortunately, adding that JavaScript to our code pen is just as easy as adding the CSS was. So let me just go ahead and do that so that we can use that in our design here. Going back to that quick start page, the introduction files that we grabbed. And similarly, we have JavaScript that can be pulled. So there are 3 different links to the JavaScript that we need to grab. So I'll go ahead and do that now. We'll copy that. And then either in this JavaScript tool area, settings area, or you can come up to the settings area and then select JavaScript. You again, just start pasting in the elements that you need. Just grab that source link, not going beyond those quotation marks in that source. Add 1 more resource, come back and get the 3rd. You notice these have .js at the end. That's the tag for JavaScript files at the end. So save that and close. Now, if we shrink this down, we should have access to that JavaScript functionality. So that's just a reminder, if ever something is not working in Bootstrap as you might expect, then adding those JavaScript elements, make sure that you have those links to those JavaScript pieces is there. Okay, any questions about components specifically? Anything that I've demonstrated here?
I'm trying to put the JavaScript there, but it's saying code 200, one of the URLs, external resource, whatever.
Is it saying that inside of your code pen?
Yes.
Or?
Well, I did it with the settings and then pasted each of the links.
Okay, let me stop my share. And are you able to share your screen with
No,
Zoom?
No. I'm in the iPad.
Oh, okay.
You just copy paste the whole link, right?
So let me share again and show you just to make sure. When we grab our link, we want to make sure, because we have a big long script source HTTP, and then it gets into these additional attributes, cross origin and integrity and things. A common thing is to accidentally go beyond that initial part and grab some or all of the rest of that link, when all you need is just what's in these quotation marks there. And copy in one of those copy paste jobs, there was some extra characters or missing characters. That would be my first place to check and see, and after that I would troubleshoot more.
Yeah, I did the whole thing.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions about components?
Can you, sorry, go back and show us where you pasted this link?
Yes. So there's two places you can go. One is the settings, and there are four different options, the job, and then there are two form fields by default that are open in CodePen, and then you can use this add another resource button as well, and you can just paste each one of those independently in there. You can also access the JavaScript one from the icon to the left of the JavaScript panel here, and that brings up that same window, but with JavaScript selected. Any other questions I can answer about components? Is everybody feeling like they're up to speed with where we're going with this so far? Okay. Some ask, why would we use components?
If you're using a particular style library, I think using components would be a lot easier to style something in a fast manner if you're trying to develop something.
Okay, great. I'd say speed is one of the most important values of using these components.
Right.
It prevents us from having to write our own HTML, write our own CSS, and give all those stylings. We use in Bootstrap, we know what we're going to get. We just grab it, we can use it, and get to the bigger picture faster, rather than spending extra time on those components or on the styling and building our own pieces.
Right. It's like a methodology.
Yeah. Great. So we've gone through components. Now we've talked a little bit about JavaScript, and JavaScript is not something we cover in this part of the program, but knowing that you have access to those functionalities and using JavaScript, it's really great to have those resources on hand. So let's see, talk about doing a little bit more customization of our components. So what we've used so far are pretty much the default components of Bootstrap. We just grab, cut, paste, what we see is what we get. But what if we do want to customize them? What if we want to make them have unique styling or layout orientation? Bootstrap provides what are called utility classes that we can use to alter the look of our components. A utility class is basically a class a CSS class that we can add to any tag in our HTML that applies to a single CSS property. So what are examples of CSS properties?
Color,
Okay, good. Color.
size, width, length.
Yeah, all of those little individual elements of those elements, the pieces of the elements that describe what it looks like and how it should appear are those CSS properties. So these classes, that the utility classes that Bootstrap has, are excellent for providing consistency and rapidly building out the designs that we want. We don't have to write as much CSS. We don't have to write as much code in general. And we can use that same style across the board. So I think that we've used some of these classes just as we've gone through the process, but we haven't called attention to them. So we're going to work with a few of them now. So let's go ahead and look at Bootstrap again. If you come here, there are the utilities right underneath the components in this menu. And we begin to see that there are, a dozen or so utilities that we can use that are associated with colors, display, flex and float, image placement, positioning, shadows, size and space, and text, and then alignment and visibility. So the way that these work are very semantically oriented. So we have a class and it's called border. It's associated with what the CSS attribute or property is. And then there are names like top, right, bottom, left, so that you know the orientation that we're talking about. And we can almost, just by reading that class, understand what it's going to do. There are additive versions and subtractive versions. So you can add a border or you can remove borders. You can change border colors and you can adjust border radius and it's corner by corner. You can do it to all corners or just pieces. So let's see this in action and experiment with that. We're going to apply this to our nav bar. Okay. Let's go to the nav bar here and add the class. Actually, I think I added some HTML. So the class we're dealing with right now is border. So I'm going to add that to my nav. So I just typed the class border and it added this border to me. I can just do border bottom. And hopefully you can see that it's a pretty gray color. This would be a good time to be typing along with me to see how this works. But it just added the border to the bottom rather than to the top. You can just add a border to the left. Can't really see that because we have our the way the nav bar is designed is going all the way to the edges of the screen. We have an empty span here with text. It will appear here and have a border around it. So that's an example of using the border to add that to a class or as a utility for that. You can deal with colors as well. So let's go look at what the Bootstrap has to say about color utilities. So for color, we are dealing with text specifically. So we can see these links, we can assign a color according to the default Bootstrap color definitions, which are primary is always going to be blue, secondary is going to be this gray, success is going to be green, danger is going to be red, etc. So let's experiment with that in our span here. We have class border. Now we have another utility that we can use, which is color. It's associated with the color CSS property, which is associated with text. So text and the feature is just text and then the label that's associated with the color we're looking for. So text primary, turn that text blue. We have attributes associated with sizing and with spacing. So let's think about what kind of spacing might we want to use. We've got spacing associated with margin. If you remember the CSS property margin in the box model, it's outside the border of the content. We'll add spacing between the object and the elements around it. And so we can deal with margin using the M notation. So M for margin and P for padding, that space in between. So we can do margin top, margin bottom, left and right, etc. We can do X or Y for like on the X-axis and Y-axis. With the X-axis, we can do margin or padding on both sides. With the Y, we can do it up, top, and bottom. So let's experiment with this a little bit. So the nomenclature, for example, would then be margin top or margin left, and then hyphen for spacing. You can also use these numbers to represent like relative scale. So it's kind of abstract. So let's see what it looks like. On our span down here, we want to add margin. And we're going to do 5. And that margin 5 moved us away from the edge there. But let's do margin top 5 and see what that looks like. Oh, what's going on? Should be working. Not sure why. Let's add some padding and see what that looks like. So because we're using a span, I think that's a problem here. It's responding right. So I wasn't thinking about that when I posted the span. We know that span is an inline element, and so would be useful in a text if you're typing in a row of text and you wanted to give styling specific to that span, a group of text. It will stay in line and you can change the color, and that's why when I copied the color using span, it made sense in that context. But when we actually want to do some layout, we want something that doesn't have inline as its primary property. So that's what was going on, just troubleshooting there. So now we have margin top 5. Let's remove the T, so it's just margin. That gives us margin all the way around. We have margin on the top. Now we have padding in the center. If we reduce it to 3 on both of those, that brings our spacing a little bit closer together to feel a little bit more snugly with the rest of the elements on the page. So these are utility classes, again, that we can use to help give shape and style to ours. Let's do a couple more examples of utility classes. Shadows. Shadow is referencing the box shadow CSS property. And so we can add a small shadow or shadow, none, shadow small, and then shadow large are some of the options we can choose from. Shadow none, shadow small, shadow, and shadow large. So regular shadow is just shadow. So we can see what those look like on this little box as well. I'm going to go ahead and make that margin 5 again, and then we're going to add shadow. That gives us our default shadow. We can remove border so it feels a little more natural. Shadow large makes that shadow expand out larger, and then shadow small, it's very, very tight against that. So again, without having to go into CSS, write a declaration of a class and then add the shadow property and then what it's declared as. All that is taken care of for you, and you can grab these utility classes and fairly rapidly just add a class to each of your HTML elements, and those classes can just be stacked. We have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4 utility classes that help us style this, and very simply, I can read through my HTML and pretty quickly understand what's going on based on this information. Okay, what questions do you have about utility classes, if any? No questions? Okay, Kelsey, what would you say in your own words, how would you describe what a utility class is?
Oh, I'm muted.
Okay.
The utility class. That's just I'm sorry. I don't know how to vocalize it today.
Okay. JP, do you have any thoughts about how you'd define it? Or Brandon?
It seems to me it's like basically a way to customize one property in particular.
Okay, great. Yeah, it is a class that you can use to associated with a specific CSS property. You can apply to that class to whatever component you're working with, and it will apply styling for that one property. Great. Does everyone feel fairly comfortable with this? And if you can't define it, can you at least feel like you'd be able to apply it to your Bootstrap components? Okay. Great. So what let's do is we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and we'll start applying some of these things to building out a form and be able to do that together. So let's take 5. Let's get rolling again. No questions in Slido. Okay, where did my pen go? Okay. So we've learned about Bootstrap components, and we are going to now, and utility classes, and we're going to now try to put together a a form using Bootstrap components. And the form itself is, we are going to be adding a name. Let's see. Name, email, message, and then a submit button. Oops, got that tag wrong. Great. Anyway, so we're going to do this together, and I want you to tell me what I should be doing as we go. So where should we start? If I'm supposed to make a form, I'm going to use Bootstrap. What's the first step I want to take in order to make this form?
Let's grab the CSS link from Bootstrap.
Okay, so get the where's Bootstrap now? So grabbing this. Make sure we have our CSS. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Okay. We go to our settings, and I was using the same one, but yeah, definitely want to have those CSS settings in there for Bootstrap. Save and close. And I would do the same for the JavaScript as well. Grab the 3 JavaScript elements from here. So if you are working along with this, which would be great if you did, then copy and paste each of those. Make sure that your CodePen is all up to date with the things that it needs in order to get going. So awesome, great start. What next?
What kind of form? What kind of form exactly are we making?
So it's just a form as though you were, someone was coming to our website and we wanted to get their comments. So we're going to collect their name, we're going to collect their email address, we're going to collect whatever comments they have in a message field, and then we're going to have a submit button that would allow them to submit that form.
Okay. Maybe if we go to Bootstrap and we see if they have a component for field forms.
Okay. So go to our components.
Yeah, they got it. They got it on forms right there.
Forms. Okay.
Component forms.
Right. So we have, as we scroll down, we're able to see the types of information that they have in their forms. Lots of different input types. So as I was scrolling down, I saw one. We're needing to get a name and email and text, and then a submit button. So it looks like we have most of those things, or some of similar components in this one. So if we go ahead and copy that and paste it. All right, we have our form appearing here. So what might we consider doing before actually pulling in a component in a Bootstrap layout?
What was the question again?
So we brought in the form and we can see it's, there's something else we might consider from a layout perspective where we actually pull in our form field or our form component. Is there anything else that we've done in the past with Bootstrap that we might consider doing?
We need a button, a submit button.
Okay, we will definitely want a submit button, but I'm getting back to more of the layout phase before we get to the form. If we want to set up our page,
Would you maybe shrink the sizes of each input boxes?
okay, we could potentially do that. But if we did that for each of those boxes, that would be adding a lot of classes for each one, which would definitely work. But is there maybe a better solution?
Is
I'm looking for something specific.
Is this where we add the rem size for?
So
You wrap it in the fluid, the container,
Yeah.
container fluid.
yeah, that's what I was looking for, Christina. Thanks. So rems, thinking about those sizes, it's good to think about those. But yeah, I was looking for getting to the grid and the container and how Bootstrap sets up a page, and then that will allow us to deal with the elements within that page, the components we add by dealing with that. So Christina said, I think it was Christina, what tag might we use? So let's actually take the form out for now, and we'll set up our page in a way similar to how we did yesterday. So she mentioned container. So what tag would I apply that class to, do you think? Just, there's no real right or wrong answer, but thinking to semantic HTML, if I've got a
section.
my body. Okay, we could do a section. And the classes container. All right, and after the section, actually, I'm going to go ahead and make this main because I think that has a little bit more semantic value to it. And then we can do a section. And what's the next element in the grid layout that we would do?
Div.
I'm talking classes. The way the Bootstrap layout works, we have a container, then we have a row, and then we have columns within the rows. So this is how we think about Bootstrap. And as you anticipate trying to make your own form in the future, and anytime using Bootstrap, you want to build out the foundation in this layout format of container and rows and columns. And that allows you the best flexibility and the less moving other elements by dealing with it in that fashion. So class equals row section, and we can actually come and paste in the form now. I just cut it away before, and now I've pasted it in. And we'll go ahead and tab that whole thing over. So we have that alignment. Okay. So that felt a little bit like it wasn't fresh on your minds. Is there anything about this that doesn't feel familiar to you, or you feel like we need to review a little bit and discuss some more? What questions or thoughts do you have there?
It's a rule that I just forgot. Even for yesterday's assignment, it was a little bit, yeah, it's just something forgetful because it's basically a rule that needs to be used.
Yeah, this is one of those things that it's hard to know if you're not remembering it, to get down and say, well, where do I start? And you can go to Bootstrap and start copying and pasting things, and that's fairly easy to just grab components, and that all makes a lot of sense. But it pays to think about getting back into the layout a little bit of the whole overview of this. This would be with reviewing today. You know, if you have extra time as you get into the assignment, and you have extra time before stretch goals, or even before you start launching into the assignment, is just review this again. Look at, we've got containers, we've got container fluid. Both of these, knowing how they function and just experimenting with them will be helpful. And then understanding the grid, and where we've gone from container to row to column, and being able to deal with that structure will pay off as you do the assignments and things. So going back and reading through a few of these pieces of Bootstrap will be beneficial too. But yeah, it's definitely something that, especially with layout, just remembering container, row, column, and what those, how they're worded, or how they're coded. So container, row, and then col dash whatever, and it's a 12 column grid that we're working within. So we only have one element in here as a column. We've declared it to be 6 columns, so it's basically building from the left hand margin 6 column widths of the width of a 12 column grid, and just putting it into that 6 columns. So okay, getting back into thinking about how layout works, or using utility classes, can anyone think how we might center this? And it's okay to go to Bootstrap if you want to try and figure out what we might do to center this form on this screen.
Would we use Flexbox at this point?
We don't have to use Flexbox, because the way Bootstrap is set up, there are some classes that we can apply that will allow us to center things just using those utility classes.
So if we say justify content, does that still apply or not?
That I don't think that using that kind of nomenclature works in Bootstrap. I could be wrong. It might be built in as a utility class, but
I found something in Bootstrap that might help.
Okay.
Is
what
it
did you find?
the class MX Auto?
Okay, class. What was the again?
It's called horizontal.
Say it again.
Oh, it's a class
Okay.
MX Auto.
MX Auto. So let's give that a shot and see what happens. Exactly. So MX, does anyone remember? We went over that very briefly. It's a utility class, and M stands for, Ivan, do you know what M stands for? You just grabbed it for us.
Oh, I do not know.
We're thinking about spacing on the outside of an object.
Margin?
Oh, margin,
yeah, exactly. So MX, and X is the horizontal axis, and auto is placing it to put fill up the space on either side. So we're saying margin left and right with the x-axis, axis, left and right, fill up the space. That's what auto means. And so that's pushing it to the center. And this is a responsive thing. So it's based on.
Could you then keep the same size by adding a style width?
Start. You know.
Whoa.
So
Didn't get any of that.
you broke out.
So if we go to our utilities, oh, sorry. So I was asking if you can tell me what you think would be the right code to use to be able to give it a width.
So after the class, style and width. And then for the width, the selected width, we can do like 300 pixels.
So you can do style equals width 600 pixels.
Question for the MX Auto. I was looking in utilities for that. I looked under display, position, spacing, and vertical align, and couldn't find that code in any of those locations. Is it somewhere else that I'm missing?
It is actually in spacing, and
spacing?
that actual nomenclature is sort of, you have to extrapolate a little bit from what they've got listed here. Okay. But so the property, so the property is M for margin or P for padding. So we'll do M, and then it was mentioning that we could add the side, so top, bottom, left, right, X or Y. So X is left and right. So then you can do MX. So you're combining these two classes together, basically.
Margin
and
left,
then
right.
And then we've got auto here. So the examples they have don't have MX listed, but this is how that is phrased for these these attributes.
And auto is you're telling it basically to center between the left and right.
Yeah, it is the class auto for margin. Sorry, I keep getting an internet is unstable message. I apologize for that again. I don't know what's going on with the internet around here, but so the auto margin always centers things from left and right. Yeah. Great question. So definitely, if you see things that are confusing, please ask about them so we can talk through them. Okay. So let's go back. Our width, did that work? We're just trying an experiment here. And that doesn't seem to be working. If we go to, not what we're looking for, sizing. It looks like there's a utility class for width that would allow us to use a percentage base for declaring a fixed width for something. So the way that is worded is we have the utility W standing for width hyphen a number representing a percentage of the parent element. So in this case, our parent element of this form is this row. So we can add, instead of using this style declaration, we can add another class, and it's W, let's say 75, just to see what that looks like. That might be interfering. We may not be able to apply that utility class because we've already declared column width. So we probably couldn't give it a fixed width while we're still using the column.
Would you then put it instead of the form class? Would you put it on the section, the width? So that would keep the whole section or the whole row on that width?
Let's see what that does. W equals, let's say 50.
Did a thing. I don't know if it did the thing we want it to do.
It seems like because we applied the margin to the form, it's staying, the form is staying within the 50% of the parent class of the section, which is the container. So we are now at 50%, and let's try an experiment and show border 1 pixel solid black. So that's a trick to be able to show the border around everything on the page. So our container is basically this first black rectangle here. And then our row, because we've given a width of 50, is now aligned to the left, and it is 50%. And then our form is 6 columns, which is basically half of the width of that, but it's centered because of the MX auto. And then we get into the other elements. But so we'll hide that again. We'll take that width off. And it might be that we're okay with this size. And if it's too big, maybe we can think about responsiveness. If I am creating this form for a mobile device and for this smaller size, we think designing mobile first. What changes might we make to this form in order to make it a little bit better for mobile?
Can you repeat that again, please?
Yes. If we want to make this form appear better in this smaller version, what classes might we add to that form to help it fill this space more appropriately for this size of device?
MX auto, and then, but change it.
Can you say that again?
To change the MX auto, like that, that class in specific. I'm not sure which one. We have 6 columns.
So if I take that one off, that aligns it there. What if I take the column off altogether? See, and then what if I do column 12? Does that feel like a better design for a mobile device?
Yeah. How do you?
And then if you wanna convert it, if you want it to be responsive, don't you have to add another column and then I guess either medium or large, depending on what you want the breakpoint to be, and then the new number for that, I guess 6.
So let's try that. So right now we're mobile, we get to medium right there, and that brings it down to a more reasonable size for that. So let's try column small 6 and see what that does. But yeah, that is the right approach for going mobile first. So you get what it should look like with your smallest size here. And then as you expand it, then you can adjust that column declaration for the breakpoints based on small, medium, and large, and that's great. So this is for what we need. Right now, as a designer, I think this email address jutted up right against the top of the screen is not working, and we also probably need a title for this form. So I'm going to add title as one of the things that we need. So we're going to, well, how might we add a label to this form? What would you do?
I guess I would do header 1 and then the title.
We'll just call it feedback form. H1. So the H1 feels pretty big, so let's bump it down to H3. See, that feels a little bit more normal. Okay, great. Now to get it away from the top, what CSS attribute? Well, not talking Bootstrap. What CSS attribute would you likely utilize or use to add space on top of that form?
I would probably give it a top margin.
Okay. Great. So go ahead.
Unless I decide I wanted to like use Flexbox to like center it in the page or something.
Okay. Great. So CSS, we're dealing with margin top, and what does that translate to in Bootstrap? Anyone? So we think utility classes are classes that are associated with one CSS attribute. So if I were looking for margin again, I do a search and I find under, oops, where'd it go? So my CSS attribute margin top is utilities spacing. We come back to this notation page for spacing utility class. So we have M, and we can do MT for margin top. And we can then add a sizing to that, and that might be the best approach to take. So in our form class, we can add MT for margin top and do 5. Let's see what 5 looks like. It gives us a lot of spacing. Bump it down to 3 and see what that looks like. That looks, I actually might go to 4 myself. And then that pulls us away from the top, gives us some spacing, and now we've got good form. All right, so what are the other pieces that we need in our form? We have a title. Now we need a name, an email address form field, and then a message field, and then a submit button.
So I have a question.
Go ahead.
Because we're working with Bootstrap, everything is being plugged into the HTML and nothing in CSS as of yet?
Correct.
Okay.
So the reason for that is because when we look at this piece of CSS, this style sheet that we're grabbing has a ton of CSS in it. So let's actually look at what that looks like. I don't remember if I showed you this before, but this is called minified CSS, which basically takes off all line breaks and spaces in between things, and it reduces page load time. But it's essentially the same CSS that we've always looked at before. So if we were interested in our form element, let's see, there are 12. All right, so come down here. That was apparently the wrong thing to search for because it's getting everything with form in it. Let's see, p tags. No, that's like div. No. So what are some classes we've done, like H? We'll do it this way. Okay, so adding the period in there for my search. So then we have form control, and a lot of different elements that are all styled with CSS. You can see the classes or these elements so that we don't have to write any of the CSS, and we can just call the classes that they've already defined for us. I don't know if that was helpful for you, but if you look at like column medium 5, that's something that we might be familiar with. So we have flex elements associated with max width elements or max width declarations, and there are let's see, text, if there's text ones. So there's text wrap, text write. All of these CSS declarations have already been made for us. That didn't take too much attention. That's why we're not writing CSS ourselves. They've already written, and we've called it through that link, and now we can just reference it in our classes. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense now. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we have some elements in our form here that aren't necessary. So we can just go into, even though we've grabbed this whole component, we know that we don't need this form and we don't need this form group. So we can delete those divs. And so with this message, because we're doing feedback, we can call this text area. Has a label here called example text area, and we'll just name it our provide feedback here. It would be a form somebody could fill out there. Email address is supplied with an example. So if we want to add, what is one of the other things that we need to add? The name. So I'll go ahead and add.
That's
both label and input. Sorry.
I was just gonna say that's an input type text, right? But you still need the email address, don't you? You don't want to delete that.
No, I don't want to delete that. So I was just copying that email. And I was going to paste it right here. But we don't need another email address form. So we have a couple of things going on here that I want to call your attention to. So we have a label, and one of the attributes of a label is to reference the input control that it's associated with. So in this case, what we've done here, because I've copied and pasted, I have two IDs that have the same exact ID. And so I want to change this ID label, or this ID, in both places so that there's no confusion with the computer about that ID. So now we have the first one that is name, and the type for this input, rather than email, Kelsey mentioned, it should be text. And the reason for that is that browsers can recognize those form types and then be able to do some checking for you to make sure that you're providing the right information. So if I just fill this out and I try to submit it, it would give me an error saying you don't have the right format for an email address. So actually I need to put, I would enter in right here, put required. If I wanted to have that browser provide that. But the submit isn't working right now. So might have done that too fast. So I apologize if that went too quickly. Let's just reiterate what we just did. We created a label for the name field. It has example form control input 1 as its ID down here. So we're referencing that in our for field. So, excuse me, so the label knows that it is for this form field for screen reader purposes. Then it's an input type. It's text, because that's just what we need for name. Right now it has a placeholder of name at example.com, but we might put in Jane Doe as a sample text here that's provided. And then for the next one, we have just what we had there before, email address, and type email. Right. We have name, we have email address, and we have need of, let's see, we have message. Now we just need a button. So tell me what I should do to get a button into this form.
Get a button from the get Bootstrap on components, and then on button.
I guess it's probably a primary button.
Okay. Just scrolling through the buttons to see if there's anything that's more relevant to us. Looks like that's all right. We'll go ahead and go with primary button. Just copy that, paste it into our form, and it appears there. And I write the label send feedback. And generally a good usability practice is to provide a label in your button that helps tell people what it is that they're about to do when they click that button. So I could just put submit, that would work. But if I have this as a feedback form and giving them a little bit more information, makes the button a little bit bigger, but not obtrusively so. So it adds more meaning, making them guess less about what it is they're about to do. So we have a feedback form. There's a name field, an email address field, provide back a feedback here box, and then a send feedback button. And just to get a little practice, let's do some styling of this page. How do you think we could create a background for this whole page while leaving the form field itself? Bless you.
Thank you.
The form field, so it just has a white background with potentially a drop shadow, and then a light gray background on the surrounding area. Any thoughts on how we might accomplish that using Bootstrap?
Sorry, were we adding a background just for the container or the whole page?
So we want the page to have a background color of gray and the form itself to have a background of white.
Oh, okay. You would do that in CSS, right? Or are we doing it in the HTML?
Well, we could definitely. What would we do with our CSS?
I would do dot container, I guess. Is that what it is for class? Yeah. And then background color, and then whatever the white. So I guess FFF or white if that works.
You want white on the container?
Is that what? No. Did you want? Sorry, I'm losing track. Did you want the whole background for the page to be white or the container background to be white?
So the whole page to be gray, but the container of the form field. So I think using the term container, let's look at what the container is. We'll apply gray to the container and see. So that's what, if we have applying a background to the container, that's where it would look like.
Can you do the border to all again on commented? So the best one then it would be for the row, and that would be just the form, but it needs a little bit of padding for everything.
Okay. So let's take the color off this. We'll comment all of this out for a second. And in CodePen, you actually have to, for creating the whole background, you would actually have to go into your settings, because the background for the whole HTML page you'd want to apply to the HTML element. You can't actually do that from CodePen, but we would apply something like that. So let's say gray. See if there's a light gray. Oops. So I actually needed to see class background. Just see if there's a utility or background color. I'm trying to think if there is. So there's a utility code for background, and you can change it to any of these colors. So I'm going to go ahead and use background secondary for the sake of this exercise in here and see if that works. Background secondary, and save and close.
Could you use like a hash code for that instead? Like BG and then whatever the hash color is?
Well, let us try that on container. So background, so gray, see what, so background secondary. So that provides us that. And then hash code, let's just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That it doesn't look like it works.
Okay.
Basically because they have to pre-assign those classes in their CSS, so that's not going to work for that. And we actually
So we can only use the colors available in Bootstrap?
Without going back in and defining new colors, then yes, that's a limitation of Bootstrap. And that's one of the reasons I mentioned yesterday, that when people started using Bootstrap a lot, because it's somewhat hard to make changes to those designs, and you sort of lose some of the benefit time-wise by having to make changes to Bootstrap, and most people were just doing it in the vanilla flavor, and that is why everything looked pretty much the same. So yeah, there are definitely limitations to that. Come back to, let's see. It looks like for some reason that adding that class, maybe it is not able to grab the CSS from Bootstrap yet. So I'm not sure why it wouldn't though. Make sure I'm doing that right. Background primary. So if I write my own class for background, background color, we'll call that background color. Doesn't look like it's a light gray. Just go like that. Maybe these wrong spelling. Oh, I'm thinking my ID. I was looking for that little red square to appear. So let's go with gray. And then we'll apply that here. That is not working as expected. So we are not going to worry about doing that at the moment and try to get this. Let's get our feedback form.
I sometimes save and then
ahead.
refresh the page and then the code magically works.
Yeah. I'll try that. Let's see. I'll try and do background. See if that does anything. Okay, well, what let's do instead is try to get it with a drop shadow. So we will come to our form and see, let's add a border utility that we just add border and then border primary. See what that looks like. Oops, I need a hyphen there. Yeah, it gives it a color. So that gives us an outline of our form field. One of the things that this form probably needs then, if this is going to be the container of that form, is a little bit of padding. So how do I add padding to this?
That would be after primary, right? Just padding and then whatever the number for whatever you want the padding to be, I guess.
So do padding, which will represent with P, and let's do 5 and see what that looks like. It's probably way too much space. So go to 2 and see how that feels. Maybe not quite enough, so go to 3. All right. That's some nice padding. And then our shadow options, if you remember, we just write shadow. That's one of the nice things about this semantic naming of these classes is, oh, shadow. That's fairly easy to remember. This is shadow regular, and we can do shadow large or shadow small, and there are very slight differences. I think we probably want it to be shadow regular. And I'm going to take off that border now that we can see the shadow because it's superfluous to have that. Now, one additional touch I want to add is to do rounded corners. So what I can do is go back and see what is the CSS class associated with rounded corners. Does anyone remember that class off the top of their head?
Is that border radius?
Right, exactly.
It's
so
right there on the screen already.
Radius.
At the bottom.
It's right there. Oh, that's funny. So I could search for it, or I could just look where I'm supposed to be looking and see it. So to apply it, we just use the keyword rounded, And then we can do rounded top, right, bottom, left, 0, just removes any rounded corners. So we'll just add rounded here. And that gives us a nice soft edge to our form. All right, we have gone through and created a form, entered in name, email address, and text, added or adjusted our labels, and all of our elements are now styled according to Bootstrap. So let's ask anybody if you have any specific questions right now about what we just did, anything that's still not quite latching onto in your brain, and if we could work just talking through it a little bit together. I'll look at Slido again, see if anything's here.
Well, how would you go about giving the first form, the name, more space from email address?
Ah, yes. So what in your mind might be a good approach for that?
You could do some peanut butter. Padding bottom.
Padding, yeah.
Okay, so let's see on.
But would you do it on name or email?
So that's a good question. My feeling is that probably, sorry, probably we would want to add margin potentially on the top of, margin. Okay, margin top, and let's just do one. Oops. One. Oops, I did it on the wrong one. Sorry, I meant to do it on the email address one. So on the label, add class, margin top 1, margin top 2, top 3. That feels closer to what's on the other one. To be honest, it seems like something weird is going on with those, why they were so condensed next to each other, because it should probably have something built in. I'm not seeing anything there, but that's how I might approach that. It's just adding the margin top class to that label and just adjust it according to that one just right there.
Okay.
All right, let's take just a quick break. We'll just do a 3-minute one. Grab a drink if you want, and then we'll come back here. Okay, everybody. Last little bit of class time. We have introduced and tried to practice more of the components and then applying these utility classes in Bootstrap, trying to adjust sizing, colors, borders, rounded rectangles, all of that using just Bootstrap and not having to apply any CSS outside of what's available in Bootstrap. And that's really what gives Bootstrap its power. So with all of that in mind, I just would love to see if there's anything that's still not clicking for you that I can help talk through and we can practice together to see. And I hope that as you're thinking of things, that you realize that a lot of development is really just checking the documentation and trying things out and seeing how they work. And as you do that and just experiment with these things, it becomes more second nature. The more you can get your hands on the keyboard, trying them out, the better off you'll be being able to both talk about what it is that you're doing. So when developers and you are having conversations about using Bootstrap or about CSS and HTML in general, you're more comfortable with it, more familiar with it. And as you're using Bootstrap for doing things like prototyping, it becomes much more quick to put things out. And many times, a lot of us have, a dozen regular code pieces that we use on a regular basis. And most of our work just uses those same things over and over again. And then occasionally we have to go and figure out, oh, I want to do this little thing. So I have to go back to the documentation again and refamiliarize myself with what the actual nomenclature is for that particular code and how it's utilized. But just as a general reminder, that's the best way to learn this, is just experimenting with it. Okay, any questions inside of that's there? What other questions can I potentially answer for you? I should probably add that if you are going to try and do Bootstrap in your own code files rather than just practicing with it in a code pen, then you would actually need to grab the full link that they provide. So you would grab your full link of CSS and copy the whole thing there. You just click the copy button and you can go to your file, and in your HTML file, the index here, just like with other elements, you would add your style sheet there. And let's actually close out these so we can see this a little bit better. In this CSS file, oops, I've already got that there up here. So we can see the style sheet and it's the Bootstrap, and we have integrity links. All of that is relevant for this index page. And then the CS or the JavaScript, you can actually copy that whole thing. And then also in the head section, you add your scripts, and those just get pasted into the file as well. So that's how you would add those in. And now all that Bootstrap would be available to me in my employee dashboard. And I can start adding those components in. Okay, any other questions? Let's look at today's assignment then. Today's project is going to be very similar to what we just did. You're actually going to be building your own form. You're going to be adding a first name and a last name field, email field, phone number, and job title and company name. And you can design and organize that form however you want. There's no comp associated with that you have to copy, and so you can experiment with some of those stylings. Just make sure you use Bootstrap, and that should be what you're building out of. You do that in a CodePen, and then just submit that the link to that in a Google Doc. Then we have stretch goals. There are some mockups that are available. This probably looks familiar to you, but you want to use Bootstrap to actually make this comp as opposed to the ways that you've done previously. And that actual design, go back here. That actual design is easy to make with actual Bootstrap components. And those assets, those images for the assets are available there. Additional super stretch goal is to add JavaScript-based components to your Bootstrap form. And it could be any of those elements, and add validation to make every field required. And I touched on that very, very briefly, so you may have to do a bit of research. We provided a link there that could help do that. Any questions about the assignment? All right. I am done with my part. I will stay on up to the top of the hour to answer any questions and walk through anything if anybody needs anything. But if you don't need anything, feel free to go start practicing or start having your lunch. And thank you so much for today. I will be gone tomorrow, but I'll be back on Monday and we'll start talking about portfolios. So good times. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Cheerio. That was a fast exit.
Yeah, everybody was out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was quick. They had their finger on the trigger.
Yeah. All right. So I'm kind of mixed on whether people are understanding